backdrop of the announcements being made by the finance minister today, I have Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who teaches economics. He's a professor of economics at JNU. Aditya Narayan Mishra, director and CEO at CIEL HR Services. Rituparna Chakraborty is a co-founder and EVP at TeamLease. And Madan is the chief economist at CARE. I want to welcome all of my panelists to this conversation. Thank you for being kind enough to give me your time. I really appreciate it. Professor Mehrotra, I'll start with you. Before we begin to examine Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman's announcements for today, I want to understand how dire is this number? 27 million Indians between the ages of 20 and 30 having lost their jobs in 1 month. Does this mirror what is also happening in other parts of the world, or are we worse off in any way?
We are worse off for a variety of reasons. We already had 268 million people who were below the poverty line in 2012, and the government has not revealed what has happened to poverty since then, but it's almost certain to have risen after that because consumption expenditure has actually declined because job growth had fallen. So let me just put this in context. Between 2012 and 2018, youth unemployment rates had already tripled. By youth, I mean 15 to 29. They had tripled from 6% to 18%. Now, I'm talking about 18% in 2018. So you can imagine what has been happening in the most recent past. So obviously, it was slowly increasing even thereafter, and it has jumped since then. I mean, last week's data that CMIE had revealed, 122 million people had fallen out of work. So, I mean, we are at 24% of the workforce of the country, which is so poor, one, and the rest of the population, for the vast majority, have informal work. You can imagine how dire this is. This is unprecedented, not just in global history, it's unprecedented in our history. We will certainly reach famine proportions. We could reach famine proportions very shortly.
But that's extremely worrying. To be even talking about famine, especially in a country like India, given where our malnourishment numbers already are. And I'm going to come back to that point of how bad this really is. But I want opening statements from the rest of my panelists as well. Mr. Sabnavis, who is also an economist, do you believe that this is temporary? Because I also want to point out the number that says that we've edged back from 27% to 24%. So when factories open, when offices open in full strength, do you believe we can bounce back to somewhere near where we used to be?
I think we should remember that when we're talking of unemployment increasing, we're looking at both organized as well as unorganized employment. Now, when we're talking of the migrant labor, I think that is essentially unorganized labor. And today, when they're going back to the rural hinterland, we should remember it's going to be a mammoth task to get them back because it's actually they have lost their confidence. The system has failed, and I think these people are going to think twice before they come back to work in the urban areas. That is when I'm talking about on organized labor. If you look at organized labor, I think it all depends upon which industry you're working in. Today, we have seen, especially in the services sector, you look at the airline industry, the hotels industry, tourism, if we're talking of entertainment, the retail sector, that is the malls, which we're talking of. I think a lot of people have lost their jobs. People have gone into salary cuts. Now, it all depends upon when this recovery will take place. And my sense is, at least for another 6 months, we cannot really think of any sign of recovery in these service sectors. In terms of manufacturing, to the extent that because of this essential commodities only being permitted in the first couple of months, things should gradually recover maybe in the next 3-4 months. But it's going to be a very serious problem for us. And we should also remember that certain states have gone in for abolition of the labor laws, which says they can hire and fire. I think the timing of it was quite disastrous. I would say maybe it's good for the companies, but definitely from the point of view of labor, it has been a negative thing. So I think it's going to be very painful, at least for 2021, we will be living with high unemployment numbers, and building it back and coming back to the old numbers is going to take a very long period of time.
So very quickly, do you agree with Professor Mehrotra that we might be looking at starvation, famine, that sort of implications right now?
I won't say it's starvation kind, but it'll be definitely very close to the threshold of the poverty line because the income is not going to come through. And whatever the government has announced yesterday and today is more in terms of providing a Nariga wage, which is insufficient. And the question is that how long can this really carry on? Today, I'm a migrant labor. I go back to my village. The government gives me these food grains and maybe the 500,000 rupees goes into my account. Are they going to give it a full year or not? Probably the answer is no. So at some point of time, yes, I'm going to be reaching that particular threshold of poverty level. And maybe what Professor Mehrotra is saying in the worst case scenario, yes, I would be driven to despair and starvation in case things don't improve anytime soon.
All right, let me bring in the two representatives of the job sector. I also must point out that, this sort of job services are only available really in corporate and urban India, but we have a large number of Indians in this age group of 20 to 30 that are employed in corporate and urban India, which is why these, voices become really important. Rituparna, Chakraborty, I'm always very pleased to have women on the panel, and we try to put as many women on the panel as we can, so welcome. What have you noticed in corporate India so far? Are we seeing large-scale layoffs? Are companies preparing lists for large-scale layoffs post-lockdown?
Thanks, Faye. Good to be back. Good to be on a show, on a discussion like this with you after a while. Yeah, I think corporate India and the organized staffing or organized employment, if I were to talk about that segment, because that's essentially where we operate, to some extent have been have put in their down payment of 2 months wages towards unemployment insurance without zero revenue. So I think that bit has happened. Have by and large corporate India have stayed compliant and have stayed committed. But I think to expect that they will be able to continue doing this is probably asking for too much, because we need to realize that capital doesn't fund salaries, customers do. And organizations, most sectors have seen zero revenues kicking in, besides maybe a couple of sectors like in the essential services. And I do believe that as we inch closer towards the lockdown being lifted, we should expect that there will be some impact by way of job losses, by way of, I call it rationalization, because essentially there are excess headcount and there is really no work. So people are there, people are getting paid, but there is zero work. We also should bear in mind that almost 88% of the workforce.
I seem to have some problem with your audio.
Sorry.
Right. Hello? I seem to have some problem with that audio. I'm going to try and talk to you. But let me also bring in, at this point, Aditya Mishra. Mr. Mishra, thank you for joining us. Just to take the point that Rituparna Chakraborty, if job loss further in corporate India, because like she said, these are businesses at the end of the day, not charities. Are we likely to see them in the younger bracket? Are we likely to see them happen to the middle management? I'm sure you know to some extent what managers are talking about right now. Would you be able to fill us in?
Yeah, I think the mid-level managers are not the first target, because there is simply no work. So the junior level, the entry-level people, that's the first target. Suppose you are a retail company and your stores are not working, or you are a entertainment industry and there is no work, or hospitality, or food and all of that, there's no work. So naturally the first target is the number of people who are at the entry level, at the junior level, and then it maps to the mid-level people as well. So it's going to happen in a proportional manner.
Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
Okay, I apologize. There seems to be a problem with the audio there, but we keep back to it. These are the challenges of working with the internet in the lockdown. So I, ask for our audience's patience. But it does seem, and let me now put all of this, all of what was said into one basket so we can examine all of this together. Back to Professor Mehrotra. It's not just, and this is my fear with my limited understanding of economics, it's not just now we're talking about rural economies that aren't going to be able to accommodate the people who are coming back to the village. How will the states of Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand be able to employ all of the young people who are currently going back into those villages? And so what happens there? The second challenge is, if when we come out of lockdown in the next few months, if employers in urban India are going to let go of people, that's going to cause a further cracking of demand, which will lead to a second wave of job loss. Where will all of this end? I mean, I know it's difficult to ask you to sort of predict, but how do you see this playing out?
Well, the CMIE data, I think, was very telling that for the first time in 15 years, the absolute number of workers in agriculture rose, and they rose within a matter of a month by over 5 million. Now, please try and appreciate the historical context here. From independence to about 2004-5, the absolute number of workers in agriculture was actually rising because the pace of structural transformation in our economy and workers moving out of agriculture was so slow that the absolute number of workers on account of population increase was still rising until 2004-5. But after 4-5, because non-agri jobs began to grow really fast at a rate of 7.5 million new jobs per annum between 4-5 and 2011-12, that for the first time, workers started to leave agriculture. So we began to see a real hastening of the pace of structural transformation and the share of workers in agriculture falling very sharply. Post 2012, we had seen that manufacturing jobs actually declined. Construction job growth fell, and the economy slowed compared to the dream run period. The result was that the number of people leaving agriculture was still positive, but it fell as compared to the 4-5-11 period. Now we are seeing, after a full 15-year period, in a matter of a month, that 5 million people have been added to the agricultural labor force. So let me go back to your question. What is the meaning of this? The meaning of this is that real wages, which were already stagnating or falling in rural areas, are going to fall even further. What is the implication for the state? The state has to respond. Now, what happened in April was that Manrega works actually fell to rock bottom. Now, today, of course, the FM has talked about reviving Manrega works, which is great news. But there's no question about it that the importance of Manrega as a wage generator is going to increase very significantly in the next few months, and it's going to remain like that for about a year.
But let me take these questions right now that are coming in for the panel. One of the things that keeps popping up, and I understand that there are a lot of very nervous young people asking about college placement. So Anand Koshi says, what happens to college placements right now? Tejas has also written in, Tejas Kochar saying, can you please address the problem of college placements? Ritu, do you want to pick that up? What do you think is going to happen to college placements? Should they be hopeful?
So I think I don't want to give any false hopes, because given that there is, I don't think any corporate out there is able to predict what's going to happen into the future. And hence one should be mentally prepared that there will be a lag, that there will be a deferment in terms of hiring. But there is a silver lining. I mean, I saw before COVID, actually campus placement across engineering as well as MBA colleges picked up. And after a long time, I saw interesting level of optimism amongst employers. So I have seen that most of them have been able to fill up their quota of placements. Of course, I'm referring to maybe the better B schools or the better engineering college, and need not necessarily be to the other graduate colleges or schools. But I think that optimism is important to bear in mind, that all corporates were looking forward to a positive outlook. And that's when people start hiring from campuses. And then comes COVID, because of which there is a certain, right now, given that they're struggling in terms of how they will manage their existing workforce, to believe that they will somehow, maybe there would be few organizations who will still go ahead and accommodate new hires or campus offers that were being made. But I feel in all probability, there will be a deferment of all such hires. But I feel that it's a deferment, and it is not something that people should lose out hope on, because there will be certain sectors in the digital side, in the essential side, which will start picking up hiring in the next 2-3 months. So yes, difficult times. I would urge everyone to stay frugal and see through this time, focus on how they can probably continue learning and invest in their learning in this phase, or just hang in there. That's all I can say. It's difficult, but one needs to just hang in there.
Yes. Saurabh Doshi 26 has in a chat asked what is the opinion on today's package, and I'm just going to get to that, Saurabh. To the rest of our viewers, thank you for your support. I have a young team and we're starting our own organization very soon, so if you actually pay us for our shows directly, it helps us keep the journalism true and honest and free, and this is really important. But a quick question before we get to examining today's package announcement is this: what is going to happen to sectors like and and restaurants and hotels, tourism? Aditya, Mishra, do you want to just answer that question for me? There are a lot of people saying, what about tourism, hospitality, placements for hotel management students? Is this something we should worry about? It's particularly a sector that's going to struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the next few months, I don't see this particular sector really picking up. So it's going to be a tough time. I think, these are three sectors which are going to take the longest to get back to normalcy. So I feel if there are offers which were made earlier, those offers are kind of going to get deferred, and probably about 20-25% of them would actually fall through. They will not, sort of come to light. So it's going to be obviously tough time. So maybe the people have to sort of look at what additional skills they could take on, or something else that they could do as a complementary to their core skills is something what they should really look at.
Yes,
come in here.
People asking about me. Yes, please go ahead, please.
Yeah, actually, for these questions, I think because we do quite a bit of research on the various sectors, that's care ratings, that's what we're doing. So our own sense is that if you're looking at, say, the banking and financial sector, that's the BFSI sector, I think this is one sector which has been performing in a very normal way. The operations have been normal in most of the segments. And therefore, if you're a student who has probably gotten a placement in the BFSI segment, it'll just be a case of waiting as to when the companies start getting on their feet and the shutdown stops and the offices open. But there's also a practical issue of a new recruit being given a laptop and being acquainted with the systems, being integrated with the systems. I think that takes a bit of time. But if you're in something like hospitality industry, as I mentioned, those services, I think the practical thing is that for the next 6 months, they will remain in the red zone. And one will have to look at alternatives if you don't have the patience. Because I think at a young age, I think one cannot be patient to wait for 6 months for something to happen. But that's the practical reality. So if you're looking at FMCG sector, you're looking at BFSI sector, I think there's definitely hope. The pharmaceutical sector, there is definitely hope. But the moment you're getting into these services, which are going to take a much longer time, our view is 6 to 9 months before they recover on an average basis. The earliest would be 6 months. I think one will have to be a bit patient or think of alternatives.
Yep.
Absolutely. Very well said. Yes.
Faye, you want me? I mean, just to add to what Madan just now said, I think we feel that there is, again, like I said, there is some silver lining. I mean, it's absolutely not hopeless. So in the immediate run, I feel in the healthcare segments, needless to say, doctors, nurses, paramedics, phlebologists, and any other healthcare professionals, suddenly we see a spike. Pharma, R&D, production, supply chain. In FMCG, particularly for staples, processed foods, we see production, distribution, logistics, there will be a pickup. Of course, in e-grocers, there is a need for delivery agents, warehouse executives, and again, logistics. Same for e-commerce, pretty much. Same for delivery apps. Then single outlet grocery retail chains. I think they are hiring right now, and I know that for a fact. So there is, again, some options there. Facility management, because these are all falling under essential services, security management, fintech companies from a tech side, cybersecurity professionals, the entire works in online education and digital workforce solutions.
Yes.
And like Madan pointed out, I think BFSI, and I also believe technology, you will see some reaction in the next couple of months, but in the long run, they're going to be the biggest beneficiaries of COVID. So,
right.
Yeah,
In fact, before I move on from this point, Ritu, Victor Swami has written in and he's given us 200 rupees. So thank you, Victor. But he's also said, how will this affect schools and the steps that schools will take to have a better relationship with parents? But I want to come back to the fact that you believe e-learning and anything to do with online device-based learning is going to do well, right? So that's possibly the route that a lot of schools are going to take as well.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think, yeah, Aditya, you're taking that?
No, it's okay. Go on. No,
I think online education has got preponed from 2030 to 2020 suddenly. Whatever we thought we should expect in 2030 is happening all around us. I mean, people who never touched a laptop or an iPad or a mobile phone to do online educations are forced to doing that. This is going to be the new order for some time. While there are visuals coming out from China where people are trying to go back to school, but I think the reality is that I don't think we still have the research infrastructure in place to send our kids safely back to school. So I think online education, whether it's for kids in schools or colleges, universities, is here to stay now. And I'm glad that it has happened.
All right, last question on sectors. Last question, and this one is about media, advertising, journalism, film. Where does that leave any of that? Aditya?
Yeah, I think, see, these are, in my view, evergreen sectors. But at this point of time, maybe media is facing challenges of revenue inflow, and hence there is a kind of distress right now. But that's temporary and it will get sorted out as soon as I think the industry opens. There will be advertising revenues and all of that coming in, and there will be some kind of stabilization which will happen. If I can just add another point on this telecom as a sector, maybe we have not discussed about it. So telecom is an essential thing, and until a few months ago, telecom wasn't really a sector where young people looked forward to work. But I think in the current context, telecom is it will be seen in a very different perspective. So right from sales to network engineers and all of that. And I think at this point of time, as the government's framework of regulation and governance for the telecom sector is likely to change, so I think it will have a positive impact.
In fact, here, Faye, I would tend to believe that if you look at the advertising sector, we've seen generally companies tend to cut down on advertising costs when times are hard. And today we're talking of a situation where there's been no production for virtually 2 months. Everybody's looking in terms of cutting costs because you can't improve the top line. And the moment you start cutting on advertising, the entire advertising business gets affected. This feeds back into the media, because what I've heard about the media, they've gone in for salary cuts already, and the media is not really feasible today because they run on advertisements. Now, if companies stop advertising, the advertising firms will have a problem, and the same thing feeds back into media. So I think this is also going to be a very painful process as we go along.
Yes. Yes, in fact, which is why smaller organizations, smaller organizations will be better. But I want to just quickly change gears, if I may. Professor Mehrotra, if you want to add to that, or I was just going to come to you for a review of today's announcements by the finance minister. Do you want to comment on the sectors and the jobs, and then we get to the finance minister, Professor Mehrotra?
Right. The only thing I wanted to add to what the excellent points that Aditya, Rituparna, and Madan have already made is the following, that young people who are listening to this program need to understand the following, that the number of entrants into the labor force is increasing every day. The number of people who have acquired tertiary education has increased dramatically over the last 10 to 12 years, and it's going to go on increasing. So in other words, competition is going to go on increasing at a very time when the economy has slowed and in fact is going to contract this year, and don't expect jobs to grow. So competition is going to be so severe that you may have to bide time and use this time very, very effectively to enhance your skills. But let me now turn to what you were asking. But you might as well ask the question before I turn.
Yeah, so I would like to just give our viewers
it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking what we've heard over the last 2 days, because honestly, we've got a crisis which is far worse than 2008, and we practically don't have a package. The government is relying upon effectively monetary policy instruments, upon banking and increasing liquidity, and that's 75% of the so-called 20 lakh crores. That's that's the math I had done, early this morning. I hope that changes by tomorrow. It doesn't look as though it's going to change. It's certainly not from yesterday and today's announcements. And it's the FISC. You see, let's try and understand as economists that this situation requires a fiscal package. Of course, monetary policy and fiscal policy has to work together, but the fiscal side, the fiscal stimulus, so far that we can make out, is no more than 2.1% of GDP, which is half of the fiscal stimulus in 2008. And that was more than enough to turn the economy around in 2 quarters. What we are getting today is half of what, at least half of what should have come, when in fact the crisis is much worse. So my heart just broke. I mean, today, finally it broke.
Yes, and I'm just going to give our viewers just a quick wrap for everything that was announced today. And this is the tranche 2. And it was an interesting thing. People asked Ms. Sitharaman, where the money is going to come from, what the PM Cares Fund is going to be used for. And she said, after I announce all the tranches, then we will tell you. So there's a certain amount of suspense being built into these announcements as well. But effectively, this is what was announced. Free food for non-ration card holders, 5 kgs of rice or 5 kgs and 5 kgs of chana. One nation, one ration card. Affordable rentals under the PMAY scheme in urban India. Small loans of 50,000 under the Mudra scheme. 5,000 crore rupees loans being made available to street vendors. 600 crore rupees to boost work in the tribal areas to be able to give them work. 63 lakh loans for farmers from rural banks. And she pointed out, very interestingly, that 11,000 crore rupees has already been spent by the central government on shelters in which migrants are being given 3 meals a day. And she pointed out that this is because so many of you think that we're not doing anything. And then she said that 2.3 crore migrants are being offered work in the panchayats. So these are the announcements, apart from some of the other smaller stuff. But actually, this is very interesting. Mr. Sabnavis, here's my question to you as an economist, picking up from what Professor Mehrotra said. When we talk about a relief package, and we're giving relief to migrants who are currently dragging their children on suitcases and cardboards and broken bicycles across the country with no shoes on, offering them loans, expecting them to borrow in order to get that relief and at some point pay back, seems like I'm not really sure what to make of it, because A, we're building this sort of debt bubble that I don't know what they're expecting and at what point we expect to be paid back, and B, what are street vendors at this point going to borrow this money for?
But what the professor said is perfectly right, that everything is being done through the monetary route, meaning we let you borrow money but you'll have to pay it back at some point of time. We give you moratoriums, but at the end of the day, we're not giving you any cash. Maybe there's a little bit of interest subvention taking place, but otherwise you'll have to pay it back at some point of time. And as you're mentioning, Faye, I think at some point of time you have to pay it if you were to create another kind of an NPA bubble. So I would have preferred that the route should have been more in case of cash transfers. You've been able to identify the people, put it in the account and make it more sustainable. With all these measures, I would think would probably work for a month or two, but after that, what happens? And talking on the issue of employment, which we started off, okay, the migrants go back, you put them on a Narayan job for 2 months. We all know in April, everything came to a standstill, there were no projects. But what happens after 2 months? We'll be having lots of people working on labor, the disguised unemployment thing will be unsustainable. So I think we have probably touched the periphery. And I think we haven't really looked at the issues which the migrants have. There's absence of communication between the center and the state. So finally, at the end of the day, none of us really bother when these migrants are struggling and probably dying on the road. And it's easy to say that we're providing this money, we're providing free meals, but the fact is that they have actually no future. They had a good future when they were working where they were working, with the construction sector going down, with the SMEs going down. If you're letting them go just at a point of time when we were thinking of opening up the economy, I think that was not probably a very sensible move in retrospect. So I think we've ended up in a mess. We're maybe throwing a bit of money at these people, probably offering up kind of jobs, but definitely this is not sustainable. And it's going to come back to haunt us because this is a very important labor force which provides support to the entire construction sector, the realty sector, the entire SMEs work on the basis of this. Just imagine the SMEs provide a large amount of employment to people in the country. Over 100 million jobs have been created. Now that we have lost all these jobs, recreating it is going to be a problem for all of us.
Absolutely, and that's really very worrying. Subra Sarwat, thank you so much for making that contribution to my team, and we appreciate it. Going back to the announcements of the government at this point, one of our viewers, Anurag, wants to ask us: Is it a good time for young people to spend money on studies overseas? I'll take that back to the professor because he deals with young people all the time. You said it's a good time to pick up a good skill. But going overseas will involve taking a loan, spending money. Is this a good time to make that investment, Professor?
Absolutely wrong time. I've just come off, in fact, of an international webinar, looking at precisely this subject. And believe it or not, most students are actually planning to defer any plans about going abroad. And they should, because the data I heard today was actually mind-blowing. 70% of all of our students who have been abroad have actually come back within the last month. Only 30% of them are abroad. I have some of my own PhD students who are stuck abroad, who are not being able to come back and who are desperate to come back. Now, so don't even think about that. You can plan on that. Going abroad takes, a year of preparation. So certainly begin to think about it and plan about it. But meanwhile, don't waste this time. It's far too important because, as I said earlier, the competition is only going to become stiffer. It's already very, very, very stiff. It's only going to become stiffer, but more young people who are getting better and better educated is going to enter the labor force just when the jobs available are shrinking. Despite the fact that Rituparna, Aditya, and Madan all said there were certain sectors which will see growth, but they will not see growth anywhere close to what you were seeing perhaps 5 or 6 years ago. That's the point I'm making.
Just to add to this, I think the IMF has spoken of a recession this year outside. So just imagine I invest maybe 50 lakhs or 1 crore and go ahead and do some course outside India. You'll be back in the same situation. There's going to be an unemployment problem. And some of the European countries, US, they have very high unemployment rates. And the last thing you can do is that you can expect yourself to get a job out there. So I think one should be a bit cautious and weigh what are the pros and cons, since it's a very expensive affair going overseas for studies.
If I may
and
add
the international
something
economy.
on this.
Just one sentence, Rituparna, before you come in. All economies of the world where Indian students go are collapsing all around us. They are all expecting contraction. So, they are not going to be able to provide jobs to you. Sorry, Rituparna.
I think this is just the time. This is just what we needed. Thanks to COVID or whatever be the reason, most Ivy League colleges have opened up most of their courses online. So I don't see a reason why one should even look at spending money and going abroad, because most of that learning is now available, in many cases free or fraction of a cost. So I guess most of the time going to these colleges is because it's more important to be at some of these places than actually being in the classrooms of these places. So I think the information, knowledge, whatever you need is all available now online. I think it's, again, like I said, time to be frugal and conserve all that. I think, like everyone said, Madan said, and Mr. Mehrotra said, I think we should be very prudent right now.
Right. We're getting a whole bunch of questions from people about different sectors. Obviously, everybody's worried about their own jobs and their own sector that they're in. But I just want to wrap up. I just want to, tie in that conversation we were having about the FM's announcements. And, let me just take this question to Aditya Mishra. The question about, the announcements being made for corporate India and for medium-sized, entrepreneur-led organizations, there hasn't been too much clarity from the government of any relief. So while we expect people to continue to pay salaries through the lockdown, where now effectively, there was the month of March, the month of April, now we're talking about May salaries. Without any clarity or any announcement from the government on how relief will be offered to business, how can business continue to pay salaries and keep people on payroll if the government is not going to give us any visibility on what this is going to look like?
No, I think there is nothing for the medium-sized companies. That's very clear. For the corporates, I think what they have done is whatever money that the government owed to the companies, the smaller ones they're releasing, but for the slightly larger ones, there are so many of them who have got nothing. And then what was required possibly was some support on the payroll, but today the support which has come is very, very small. That's on the PF side of it for 3 months. That's a very small sum of money. So companies, for last 3 months, if your revenues are near zero or maybe 50%, 40%, 30% of what you used to have, so the wages are much higher than the income that you have. So where will you get the money from? I think there is nothing that medium-sized company can for the company. The advisory that the government has said that there would be no layoff and no wage cut, I think is simply just not tenable. And because it is just an advisory, some of those labor officers are possibly kind of trying to take some, sort of a moralistic, nationalistic view or socialistic view and pushing the companies, reminding the entrepreneurs, the directors that, hey, if you don't do it, we will take action and things like that. There's a lot of confusion about this. But I think it's going to be very, very tough for the month of May and surely for the month of June.
Faye, I have one point here. I think it's necessary for the government to do clear messaging about when it intends to end the shutdown. Because honestly, all of us know that a number of cases are just going to keep increasing. They're not going to come down. And I think we've already lost time in the month of May. We keep saying lockdown number 2, number 3, 4.0, 5.0. And I think if we have a clear clarity about when we're going to end, I think companies will be able to plan better. At least we had a case of saying trains can run, then you say trains cannot run, we cancel the tickets, airlines can take off, they cannot take off. At least if the people have clarity about when things are going to open up and how they should deal with it, they can have plans. I think this kind of messaging is absolutely required. Otherwise, we're moving towards a very dangerous situation where even the regular companies will not be able to pay their employees because they can't plan for the year.
While I would agree in principle with what Madan is saying, and he's absolutely right, the difficulty, Faye, is the following. That what we've seen is that despite what is now a 50-day lockdown, the number of cases has only gone on skyrocketing.
Yes.
That means that what several investigative journalists had told us more than 2 weeks ago, that ICMR had suggested a strategy for flattening the curve during the lockdown. The lockdown was intended to flatten the curve. The fact of the matter is the opposite has happened because the ICMR strategy, we don't have the time to go into that, was not adopted. And because it was not adopted, Madan's recommendation is absolutely correct, but the government itself doesn't know what to say because it doesn't know when this is going to peak. Because it may well be that we could go on, we are being told by the AIMS Director General that this is going to peak in June and July. Well, that's not very helpful.
Yes.
It may well be will be going on because community spread is already happening. And all these migrant workers who are going back, packed like sardines in trucks and in tempos. Do you think, are you seriously saying that these people are not going to spread COVID? Please give me a break.
But Professor, doesn't that then leave the government in a catch-22 situation? I was just having a conversation with a doctor on a previous show who said this is Sophie's choice. Because on one hand, if you open up the lockdown, you will have a surge in cases, which I can tell you from visiting hospitals yesterday, we cannot handle a surge in cases. There is no room in our hospitals, especially in Mumbai. If you do not lift the lockdown, then economically, the cost that the poorest is paying is shocking. And we're losing lives on that hand. So where is the balance here? How does one make that decision?
I'm speechless. Honestly, I told you that my heart broke today, finally. I have nothing to say, honestly.
I think we need to learn to live with the virus, create the safeguards. And I think lots of us are more conscious today when we move out of our houses. And I think that's how we cope with it. And I think if you look at the mortality rate of around 3.5%, it's not that as grave as what it's in some of the European countries where it's been above 10%. So I think we need to open up and live with it and learn along the way, do everything very gradually, but definitely open up. Otherwise, we're not getting anything. We're not controlling the spread of virus. At the same time, people could be dying of starvation at some point of time. The government doesn't have those kind of resources. So I think
I agree with Madan. You know what we need, what we haven't understood is that Kerala had a strategy.
Yes.
The world is praising Kerala. And Kerala is only doing what the ICMR was telling the government to do a month ago. And Kerala government started 50 days ago with that strategy. The trouble is that Kerala has a public health system. The rest of the country doesn't. Point one. Point two, Kerala has very dynamic local governments and a very conscious population. When are the rest of our states going to learn from Kerala's success story, which is at least 50 years old? For God's sake, if we are going to make any announcements tomorrow, can we hear something about what is going to happen to the health sector? Look, we've got a national health policy, Faye. The national health policy had claimed that we are going to achieve 2.5% of GDP on public expenditure on health by 2025. In 2017, we said, oh, we'll achieve it 8 years later. You know, China has been at over 2% of GDP when their GDP is 4 times ours for the last 10 years. And therefore, China has flattened their curve and they have moved on. When are we going to get our act together?
Absolutely. In fact, I have to tell you this. I spent yesterday going to hospitals in Mumbai to meet doctors, to meet patients. The state of our healthcare sector, this is right. This is maybe a collective responsibility of us as a country over the last many decades. We didn't push hard enough. We didn't push our governments hard enough to put more money in healthcare to improve our healthcare sector. I mean, look at how many new large public hospitals we've built in any of our cities in the last 20 years. Not many. And the pressure on these hospitals is unthinkable. I mean, we found non-COVID patients lying outside the hospital on the veranda because there was no place inside. Typhoid patients, patients with breathing problems, who obviously from those morbidities will be more vulnerable to the virus, outside the hospital because there's no room inside the hospital. Rajan Marcus again telling us that doctors need some relief package as well. because they don't have access to proper kits at this point. We know that the N95 mask, which was about 11 or I think 20 rupees before COVID, is now being sold at 250 rupees. So things like this are happening in our country right now. But I just want to, and I want to point this out to our audience, and this is a question for the whole panel. It was possible in week 1 and then maybe 2 and then 3 and then 4, we're in week 5 now of the lockdown. It was possible for the government to lock us down, but give money in the hands of those who weren't working to make sure they weren't starving, and then make sure that they were not moving. And I want to give an example, if I may. It was the Chief Minister of Telangana came out and for the first time in his public career made a speech and a statement in Hindi. He normally speaks in Telugu. And he said, don't go. I will hire and procure the produce from the farmers and give it to you for free. We will give you atta if you don't like eating rice, but we will make sure you are looked after. Do not leave the state of Telangana. We're going to look after you. Now, that may or may not have worked full 100%, but Professor, is that something the government can still do even today?
Of course it can do. That's exactly what Kerala has been doing. You know how it treats its migrant workers? It doesn't even call them migrant workers. They call them guest workers. They treat them with respect. And उनको चावल, अगर वो चावल के देश से आए तो चावल खिलाया जा रहा है, आटे के देश से आए तो आटा खिलाया जा रहा है. I mean, so there's a caring attitude of the government. Let me not even go there, but let me pick up on what you said. You said something very important here, and I think Madan has also made this point, that we need to put cash in people's hands. And I can tell you, we could have had a minimum income guarantee which costs only 0.6 to 0.7% of GDP. I've done the design for that. I gave the design to Dr. Rajiv Kumar about a week ago. I've been working, I've been working on this subject for, this is going to cost nothing, and this is going to cost less than PM Kisan, but it will be much more inclusive. If 60% of rural households would be covered with my design, 46% of urban households would be covered with my design. This could start in 15 days. But this has to, first you have to take a decision that you want to do this.
Yes. Quick questions to our two guests from the employment sector. Lots of questions coming in from you. Ritu, someone wants to know what happens to the shipping industry. Is this something that they can have any hope for? This is DJ Joey says, what about the shipping industry? Do you have any inputs there?
Wow. I mean, you couldn't have picked a more unique industry in the current times. Well, I don't think I'm remotely an expert in that, but I guess from, I mean, this is a completely personal experience and an anecdote, that because there is a friend of mine whose husband actually is with a shipping company and is in a ship. I guess there is restrictions right now, even from in terms of movements of these, but I honestly think that that may not be very hugely impacted by COVID at this point of time, that segment, because I guess logistics is a very important part, and if especially shipping industry, which is involved in logistics and movement of large goods from one place to another, I think is a necessity right now. So I feel that I don't expect any exceptional or abnormal impact on the shipping sector, but I could be wrong because I'm entirely not an expert.
International trade will collapse, Rituparna. International trade.
No, I agree. I agree. What I'm saying is from a shipping perspective, but yes, if what Mr. Mehrotra is talking about, if that plays out, and of course there is a lot of localization and input on localization, and there is a shift away from globalization. If at some point those have impacts, but honestly, it's a sector that one has to watch out. I don't think I can claim to be an expert on that segment.
The other question is about...
Just a quick comment on this. See, the shipping industry is going to be dependent upon what happens to foreign trade. If my imports and exports don't increase, and in a kind of a global recession kind of a situation, we're not going to see very buoyant foreign trade, in which case the shipping industry directly gets affected. And again, we're talking to industry, this is the kind of feedback we get. We have seen that when we're talking of logistics, the domestic logistics, which has to also start getting back on its feet. We have lots of goods. In fact, some of the poor people tell us that a lot of imports have come in. There's lots of stuff which is lying there, but there's nobody to pick it up because the transportation system is out of order. So I think in the short run, these kind of issues will have to be taken care of. Only then can we even think about moving forward. But I would tend to be a bit more pessimistic when it comes to the shipping industry because of the fact that global trade is going to be in a negative territory this year. So it will be more a case of only essential goods which will be moving up and down across countries.
Right. Last question, and this one comes from Akash, who says, what about architecture, construction? And I'll just add real estate to it. Architecture, construction, real estate. And here's the thing. Real estate is a bubble, is a balloon that might blow up in a lot of our faces right now. And while there are people who actually feel happy that, oh, the prices of real estate will crash, the truth is that so much of our net worth as Indians is tied in real estate. Each of us either has a home that we're paying EMIs on, or our parents have a home that in somewhere in the back of your head is your wealth and your life savings. The crashing of the real estate sector is something that should worry us all. But Aditya, Mishra, do you expect jobs in the real estate sector to be a lot worse than other sectors? I don't think we're expecting any sector to be better, but to be worse.
Yeah. No, I think, optimistically speaking, the government has to find ways of investing in infrastructure and rural infrastructure. So that will sort of, it's not really real estate in the sense of commercial or residential, but it's construction industry. So in construction industry, I think highways and many other state roads, that's the only way the government can do something to sort of bring some activity back and some lubrication to this economy. So the core sector, construction being core and links with manufacturing, I think it will take off after some time. I'm just being
so it's still engineering more than architecture, and
yes, so
and
it is linked to that. And then on this architecture and engineering point, I guess there will be more of outsourcing work which could flow into India in these two areas. So maybe people who are in architecture, civil engineering, mechanical, structural engineering, electrical engineering will find some jobs in this outsourcing of design work, which will happen from the developed world to India.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. I want to really thank my panelists for their patience. With all of the questions that we tackled, also your patience with the system and the internet and everything else we're working with right now. I appreciate it. There's obviously there are going to be difficult times going forward in almost every sector. If we listen carefully to what Professor Mehrotra and Mr. Madan Sabnavis said, that it's going to get difficult, guys. This is not over. And even if the battle with the virus at some point simmers through, and we're nowhere near simmering, we still have the economic battle that will come after that. And which it'll come in sort of waves, and we're going to have to handle it in waves. So we're just going to have to dig our heels in and be ready for that competition that they predict. For people watching at home, yes, it is time to worry about your jobs. Yes, it is time to be concerned, to find ways to make yourself more relevant to your office. For young people, if you have any money in your bank account, now is a good time to save that money. You have not gone out for 2 months, and you've not bought fancy coffee or gone out for dinners, which is why you probably have this false sense of money in your account at this point. The liquidity that you're feeling is not real, so please don't spend that money. And hang on to it as much as you might feel at this point that you want to donate some amounts, but also hang on to the money, because there's tough times coming in and we have to be super careful. Also, for those of you asking questions about sectors, pretending you're interested in jobs, but actually interested in investing in the stock market, my advice to you would be to hold off doing that as well at a time like this. We're going to try and do more of these conversations. I want to thank my panelists for being generous with their time. For our audience, please subscribe and hit on the bell icon. Every evening at 8 o'clock, we'll be back here with another one of these conversations. There's no shouting, there's no politics. It's simply about understanding what's going on in the country and how we can navigate this time. Thank you for watching.